Nübüvvet, hakikat arayışında peygamber ışığı.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning to all. Thank you for being here. My thanks go to the Istanbul Foundation for Thank you. For science and culture. And my paper today is entitled Nursi, Prophetic Traditions and Sociologically Informed Theology. I will go slowly so that the interpreters can have time to interpret my English into the various languages, so I'll go very slow. Basically, my paper posits that Bediüzzaman Said Nursi, Theological Reflections, is to be sociologically complex. It is testament to his commitment to produce theological notions that reflect Islamic teachings, more importantly, in tandem with changing realities, at least in today's world context. As Nursi reformulates the relevance of Islamic doctrines in light of everyday Turkish Muslims, be it secularism, irreligion, so on and so forth, I wish to highlight that his discussion of religion, his discussion of Islam, becomes more than just theological. It is sociologically grounded, which makes it very relevant to our social lives today. In order to understand how Nursi derives his theological views within the Risale, as well as its sociological underpinnings, I use a framework which examines 3 points. First, the social context. Secondly, the social determinants. And thirdly, the social significance of theology. However, in view of the limited time today, and I understand that our articles or our papers are available online, I will just briefly discuss the first 2 traits, and if time allows, and if the chair allows, I will touch on the last point. So how I'm going to go about discussing these 3 points is, I will start with a definition of the approach, explain what it's about, and then move on to identify the issues with which Nursi actually applies these approaches. But before I start, just a few qualifying statements, something that I want to highlight before my discussion. Firstly, Nursi's use of sociological approaches affirms the validity of his theological views. His use of sociology makes his theological views valid. Unfortunately, and despite various discussions on the advantages of a dialogue between sociology and theology, there is the prevalent fear that the belief will be distorted if it is in part sociologically determined. Now, I need to clarify, and just to be clear, it is not the Quran's universal truth that I am trying to deny, but it is rather the need to examine particular theological stances. There are some who view true theology as timeless truth, which means having the ability to actually ignore social context altogether because it's timeless. This, I think, possibly may be linked to the dominant Muslim scholarship, which has had little emphasis on socio-historical context in which revelation occurred, and also on the role of Prophet Muhammad in the revelatory process. But to cut things short, what I seek to emphasize here is that while one might say that it's eternal revelation, and it's independent of any socio-historical context, the question is, how do you understand it and how do you apply it? So that's the main question that I want to emphasize on. And this is where the topic of my discussion is linked to the bigger theme of prophethood for today's, or rather this year's conference on Said Nursi, how it's linked to prophethood. The very question of Muhammad's prophethood is tied to how the Quran can be given successful expression in contemporary times. And I think Kenneth Craig actually writes it nicely in a quotation, if I can read it to you. No success is automatically perpetual. There may be finality in the exemplification of what success means and achieves, but there can be no finality in the achieving, given the flux of history. What this means basically is that successfully following the method and approach of Prophet Muhammad very much depends on understanding the Islamic revelation anew in light of today's changing context. The role of Muhammad, the role of Prophet Muhammad, was more than a passive recipient of the revelation. And so, by this argument, Nursi was actually adhering to the prophetic traditions of producing sociologically informed theology, which makes for more relevant theology for a more progressive society. And now I come proper to the approaches and how I go about discussing how Nursi employs them. So what is this first approach? The first approach depends upon the assumption that theology does not work in a vacuum, but that theologians tend to make claims about the society and culture within which they operate, and then incorporate these claims into their theology. And within this first sociological approach, it provides him perceptive tools for three. Firstly, to reflect on the significance of social context in earlier theological interpretations. Secondly, so as to understand better the changing social context within which he operates. Thirdly, in the bid to produce relevant theological interpretations. So herein, I really stress the importance of social context that can never be underestimated. It's very, very important. So if I can give you an example, the Prophet's companion, Umar al-Khattab, he was concerned with the divergent opinions within the Islamic community, despite, having only one Prophet and one Qiblat. He thus confided in Ibn Abbas, who told him, and this is what Ibn Abbas said: "The Quran was revealed to us, and each time we read a verse, we know what is behind the revelation. But after us, there will come people who will continue to read these verses while having forgotten the context. And this will provoke divergent readings, which will degenerate into internecine quarrels. And in order to avoid such conflicts, the companions and followers were careful to record the circumstances of the revelation, and when that was lost, they preferred to refrain altogether from commenting on the passage." So this is how important the social context was during that time. And as for Nursi, how do we bring this back to Nursi? He held a pluralist interpretation of the purity of belief based on the existing social context. Similarly, he compared the different social milieus and noted the increasing intra-religious diversity, not just inter-religious, as a de facto feature and social fact of modern society. Nursi concluded that to maintain belief in religion, to maintain belief in Islam, it was important for Islam not to be tied or translated to oneness in interpretation. It was plural. This was to allow socio-historically contingent responses for different places and times. And he added that time, spatial difference might not even exist for truth. In the form of sacred laws and prophets, and if I might quote him, he says, "There were even different prophets and laws in the same continent in the same century." So, and such social philosophy, including pluralism, according to Nursi, was important for the people of religion who were inclined, and he describes them, to oppose each other in rivalry, although they are the people of truth and concord. He attributed such lacking social philosophy, in this case pluralism, among the people of religion to be the root cause of religious decline. The use and value of pluralism to revitalize faith was advocated to prevent escalating tensions within the Muslim world, which he predicted, and as all of you might know, materialized today and is going on today. And so in any pluralistic society, it is critical for both inter-religious and intra-religious engagements to be carried out with decorum. And I I must highlight that such conceptions of pluralistic society is not new in Islam. As early as 622 AD, Prophet Muhammad had already effectively established a pluralistic society under a social treaty called the Madinah Charter. Thank you. And this charter lasted 1,000 years, and it laid down rules for a multi-religious population of about 1,000. Now, what is important about this is that this early reference to pluralism historically substantiates that the model suggested by the Prophet was not the Islamic nation state today, but on the basis of the possibility of such inherently pluralistic secular state. Nursi similarly did not oppose the idea of a secular state. For Nursi, living in a nation state that did not implement Islamic law did not render anyone any less of a Muslim. You know, living in a nation state that has Islamic law did not make anyone more of a Muslim. He nonetheless expected, and this is important, he nonetheless expected the secular state to be neutral in terms of respecting the rights and freedoms of various religions. Because of the time constraints, I think I'll just stop at the first factor, and if you're interested, my people will be online on the Istanbul Foundation website. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
İstanbul İlim ve Kültür Vakfı